There are stories that begin with hope and end in ashes. There are tales of friendship twisted into betrayal, of creations meant to bring joy that instead became prisons for innocent souls. And at the heart of one of gaming's most intricate and haunting narratives stands a man whose name echoes through abandoned pizzerias and burning buildings alike. His creations entertained thousands of children. His inventions revolutionized animatronic technology, and his final act would bring an end to decades of suffering, even as it consumed him in flames. This is the story of Henry Emily. In the sprawling universe of Five Nights at Freddy's, where possessed animatronics stalk the halls of decrepit restaurants, and the line between life and death blurs into something altogether more sinister, Henry Emily occupies a unique position. He is not a villain. Though his inventions enabled unspeakable evil, he is not entirely a hero. Though his final sacrifice saved souls that had been trapped for decades, he is something far more human than either of those labels would suggest. He is a father who lost everything, a businessman who trusted the wrong person, and ultimately, an architect of both nightmares and redemption. To understand Henry Emily is to understand the very foundation upon which the entire Five Nights at Freddy's franchise is built. Before there was Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, before there were possessed animatronics hunting night guards through darkened hallways, before there was the purple guy and his trail of murdered children, there was a simple dream shared between two men. A dream of bringing joy to families through the magic of animatronic entertainment. One of those men was William Afton, who would become the most prolific killer in the franchise's history. The other was Henry Emily, whose grief would eventually bring that reign of terror to its end. But let us not rush to the conclusion. Every story worth telling deserves to be told from its beginning, and the beginning of Henry Emily's tale takes us back to a time before the tragedies, before the murders, before the fire. It takes us to the opening of a small family restaurant in the 1970s, where two friends stood at the threshold of what they believed would be a bright future. The story of Fredbear's Family Diner is, in many ways, the story of American entrepreneurship at its most optimistic. Somewhere in the early to mid-1970s, likely around 1973, based on information gathered from various sources within the games, two men came together with a shared vision. William Afton and Henry Emily were, by all accounts, close friends. They shared a passion for robotics and engineering, and they shared a dream of creating something that would bring happiness to children and families alike. The result of this partnership was Fredbear's Family Diner, a local family restaurant that would eventually spawn an entertainment empire and a legacy of horror that continues to this day. The exact nature of their partnership reveals much about both men's characters. William Afton, while certainly possessing technical knowledge of his own, appears to have focused primarily on the business aspects of their venture. He handled finances, management, and the day-to-day operations that kept their establishment running. Henry Emily, on the other hand, was the creative genius behind their animatronic attractions. It was Henry who designed and built the original animatronics that would become the cornerstone of their business. It was Henry who invented the revolutionary spring lock technology that set their creations apart from any competitor. The spring lock suits were, in concept, a brilliant innovation. These special hybrid suits could function in two distinct modes. In their standard animatronic mode, they operated as autonomous entertainment robots, performing shows and delighting audiences without the need for human operators. But with the use of a hand crank, the animatronic components could be wound back against the inner walls of the suit, creating space for a human performer to climb inside and operate the character manually. This dual functionality meant that the same suit could serve as both a lifelike animatronic performer and a wearable costume, maintaining the illusion that these characters were somehow more real than simple mascots. The two original Springlock animatronics were Fredbear, a golden bear who would serve as the establishment's primary mascot, and Spring Bonnie, a golden rabbit who served as Fredbear's companion. These two characters would perform together on stage, entertaining the children who came to Fredbear's family diner. Henry himself would often don the Fredbear suit to interact with guests, while William would wear Spring Bonnie. Picture them in those early days, two friends bringing joy to children, completely unaware of the darkness that would eventually consume everything they had built. But beneath the surface of this idyllic partnership, there were aspects of the Springlock technology that would prove catastrophically dangerous. The spring-powered locking mechanisms that held the animatronic components in place were extremely sensitive to moisture and sudden movements. If the spring locks were to fail while someone was wearing the suit, the animatronic parts would snap back into their original positions with tremendous force, impaling and crushing the unfortunate wearer. This was not a theoretical danger. Phone Guy, in his recordings from Five Nights at Freddy's 3, makes it clear that springlock failures were a known risk and that the official protocol for someone experiencing a springlock failure was to find a secluded area where they could bleed out without disturbing the guests. The inherent danger of springlock technology would eventually claim lives. It would ironically become the instrument of William Afton's own gruesome transformation into Springtrap. But in those early days, the technology simply represented innovation, a way to create more immersive and magical experiences for the families who visited Fredbear's family diner. As the business grew and prospered, so too did the families of its founders. Henry Emily had a daughter named Charlotte, though she was commonly called Charlie. She was, by all accounts, the light of Henry's life. The bond between father and daughter was strong, and Henry's love for Charlie would ultimately drive many of his later actions. William Afton, too, had a family. He was married and had 3 children: Michael, Elizabeth, and a younger son whose name has never been definitively established in the game canon, often referred to by fans as the Crying Child or Evan. The success of Fredbear's family diner led to expansion. Henry and William founded Fazbear Entertainment, a corporate entity that would manage their growing chain of entertainment venues. They developed new animatronic characters beyond Fredbear and Spring Bonnie. The classic lineup that would become iconic was born. Freddy Fazbear, a brown bear who would become the new face of the franchise, Bonnie the rabbit, Chica the chicken, and Foxy the pirate fox. These 4 would eventually become the primary animatronics of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, the larger and more elaborate successor to Fredbear's. During this period of expansion, evidence suggests that Henry and William worked with other contractors and engineers. The tales from the Pizzaplex book series and the game Five Nights at Freddy's, Secret of the Mimic, introduce a character named Edwin Murray, who operated a company called Murray's Costume Manor. Edwin entered into a partnership with Fazbear Entertainment as a contractor, helping to manufacture and develop animatronic technology. Audio diaries from Edwin suggest that he had primary contact with Henry during this period, and the two appear to have been friends. Edwin even refers to Henry by the casual nickname Hen, suggesting a level of familiarity and warmth between them. But even as the business expanded and prospered, darkness was already creeping into the partnership. William Afton, for reasons that have never been fully explained in the game canon, harbored a capacity for terrible violence. Whether this darkness was always present within him, or whether it developed over time, whether it was triggered by some event or simply an expression of his fundamental nature, the man who had helped build an empire of childhood entertainment would become a serial killer of children. The exact chronology of events in the early 1980s remains somewhat ambiguous in the Five Nights at Freddy's lore, with different sources sometimes providing conflicting information. However, the general sequence of tragedies that befell both families is relatively clear. In 1983, two devastating events would shake the foundations of everything Henry and William had built. The first tragedy struck William Afton's own family. His youngest son, the crying child, was terrified of his father's animatronic creations. This fear was not irrational paranoia, but rather a child's intuitive recognition of the danger these machines represented. Unfortunately, his older brother Michael did not share this understanding. On the day of the crying child's birthday party at Fredbear's family diner, Michael and his friends decided to play a cruel prank. They grabbed the terrified boy and lifted him up to Fredbear's face, intending to force him to kiss the animatronic as a joke. But Fredbear was in animatronic mode, his jaw programmed to move as part of his performance routine. The mechanical mouth clamped down on the child's head with tremendous force, crushing his skull in what would become known as the bite of 83. The child did not die immediately. He lingered in a coma, haunted by nightmarish visions of the very animatronics that had caused his injury. These nightmares form the basis of Five Nights at Freddy's 4, where players experience the terror of being hunted by twisted, monstrous versions of the Fazbear animatronics. Eventually, the crying child succumbed to his injuries and died. This tragedy alone would have been devastating for anyone, but for William Afton, it appears to have either triggered or accelerated something far more sinister within him. The second tragedy of 1983 struck Henry Emily directly, and it would define the rest of his life. His daughter Charlotte was at one of their establishments when she found herself locked outside. The exact circumstances of how this happened vary slightly between different tellings of the story. In the security puppet minigame from Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria simulator, we see that Charlotte was wearing a special green bracelet that allowed the security puppet animatronic to track and protect her. This puppet was one of Henry's creations, designed specifically to keep his daughter safe while he worked. On this particular night, other children placed a gift box on top of the security puppet's own box, trapping it inside and preventing it from reaching Charlotte. Left alone outside the restaurant in the rain, Charlotte became an easy target. William Afton, for reasons that remain shrouded in mystery, chose this moment to commit his first known murder. He drove up in a purple car, approached the helpless girl, and killed her. The Take Cake to the Children minigame from Five Nights at Freddy's 2 shows this scene in stylized 8-bit graphics, depicting a crying child outside the restaurant and the purple figure of William Afton approaching in his car. The child's sprite turns gray, signifying death, before Afton drives away into the night. The security puppet, having finally freed itself from its box, rushed outside to find Charlotte. But it was too late. The animatronic found only Charlotte's lifeless body lying in the rain. In an act that seems almost like mechanical grief, the puppet crawled to Charlotte's corpse and embraced it. The rain that had been falling began to damage the puppet's systems, causing it to malfunction and deactivate while holding the dead child in its arms. And then something remarkable and terrible happened. Charlotte's spirit, refusing to pass on, entered the security puppet. She possessed the animatronic that had been created to protect her, becoming one with it in death, as she could not be in life. This possession would transform the security puppet into what would become known as the marionette or simply the puppet, one of the most significant animatronics in the entire Five Nights at Freddy's franchise. The significance of Charlotte's possession cannot be overstated. She was, according to Henry himself, in the insanity ending of Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria simulator, the first child to have her soul trapped in one of his creations. She was the first small soul to be trapped in prisons of my making, as Henry would later describe it with profound regret. Her possession would establish a pattern that would be repeated again and again, as William Afton continued his killing spree, and Charlotte herself would play a crucial role in enabling those future possessions. The puppet, now inhabited by Charlotte's spirit, developed abilities that went beyond simple animatronic functions. It could sense innocence and malice. It could perceive the souls of murdered children. And most importantly, it could facilitate the possession of other animatronics by the spirits of William Afton's victims. In the Give Gifts, Give Life minigame, we see the puppet visiting the bodies of murdered children and somehow transferring their souls into the animatronic suits. Charlotte, in her new form, became a protector of sorts for the murdered children, giving them the same second chance at existence that she had found, even if that existence was one of confusion, anger, and ultimately violence. For Henry Emily, the murder of his daughter was a devastating blow from which he would never fully recover. The details of his immediate reaction are not fully documented in the game lore, but we can piece together certain elements. Charlotte's death led to the closure of Fredbear's family diner. The combination of this tragedy and the bite of '83 made it impossible for the establishment to continue operating. The spring-lock suits were eventually retired due to safety concerns, though some would remain in storage, waiting to claim future victims. What makes Charlotte's murder even more painful is the relationship between Henry and William. They were friends. They were business partners. They had built their dreams together. And yet William, for reasons that remain one of the great mysteries of the franchise, chose to murder his friend's daughter. Some fans have theorized that William blamed Henry for the death of his own son, since Henry had created the animatronics including Fredbear. Under this interpretation, Charlotte's murder was an act of revenge, William taking from Henry what Henry's creations had taken from him. However, this remains speculation, as the games have never definitively explained William's motivations. Henry's response to the murder is equally unclear in its immediate aftermath. Phone Guy, in his recordings from Five Nights at Freddy's 2, mentions that the company was trying to track down the original restaurant owner, who had been missing for years. This suggests that Henry distanced himself from Fazbear Entertainment following Charlotte's death, disappearing from public view and from any active role in the company he had helped create. Whether he knew immediately that William was responsible for Charlotte's death, or whether he discovered this truth only later through investigation, is not definitively established. What we do know is that Henry spent the following years consumed by grief and eventually by a burning need for answers and justice. He investigated William's activities. He discovered the existence of remnant, a supernatural substance that could be extracted from possessed animatronics and that could somehow preserve or transfer consciousness. He learned about the Scooper, a device William had created at Circus Baby's Entertainment and Rentals to extract this remnant from the animatronics housing murdered children's souls. He pieced together the full scope of William's crimes, understanding at last that his former friend was not just his daughter's killer, but a serial murderer responsible for the deaths of numerous children. The years between Charlotte's murder in 1983 and Henry's re-emergence in Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria simulator represent a dark period of the franchise's timeline about which we know relatively little. Fazbear Entertainment continued operating under new management, opening and closing various locations as tragedies continued to pile up. The missing children incident of 1985, in which William Afton lured 5 more children to their deaths at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, added to the body count. The victims of this incident, Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz, and Cassidy, were stuffed into the animatronic suits by William to hide their bodies and subsequently possessed those suits, becoming the vengeful spirits that would haunt the original Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Throughout all of this, Charlotte, now permanently merged with the puppet, remained active. She watched over the other possessed children, guiding them in their new existence even as they sought revenge against their killer. She appeared in various Fazbear Entertainment locations, always recognizable by her distinctive appearance. A tall, slender figure with a white mask bearing painted cheeks and lips, purple tear marks running down from her eyes, a visual representation of the sorrow that defined her existence. The music box in the prize corner of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza kept her dormant, its melody somehow soothing the restless spirit within. But when the music stopped, the puppet would emerge, driven by purposes that players could only speculate about. Henry, for his part, remained in the shadows. He watched from afar as his creations were corrupted, as children died and possessed the animatronics he had built, as his former friend continued his rampage, largely unchecked. The guilt must have been overwhelming. Every child who died at William's hands, every soul trapped in an animatronic prison, represented another weight on Henry's conscience. He had built the animatronics. He had invented the spring lock technology. He had trusted William Afton. And while he was not directly responsible for the murders, he could not escape the feeling that he had enabled them. In the insanity ending of Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria simulator, we hear a recording of Henry reflecting on these events. His voice is heavy with regret as he speaks of discovering what had become of his creations. He describes finding a wound first inflicted on me, but then one that I let bleed out to cause all of them. This phrase is particularly significant because it acknowledges both his victimhood and his complicity. Charlotte's murder was a wound inflicted on him, but his failure to stop William, his failure to intervene as more children died, was something he let bleed out to affect others. The guilt is palpable in every word. Henry mentions in this recording that he considered ending his own life. The weight of what had happened, the knowledge of what his creations had become, the guilt of his perceived failures, all of it pushed him toward despair. But he could not bring himself to take that final step, not while William Afton still lived. Not while the souls of murdered children remained trapped in animatronic prisons. Not while his own daughter's spirit was still bound to the puppet she had possessed. He had work to do. He had a debt to pay. And he would see it through to the end, no matter the cost. This decision, to live long enough to make things right, would shape the rest of Henry's story. It would lead him to construct an elaborate trap for William Afton and the remaining possessed animatronics. It would lead him to create Lefty, a special animatronic designed specifically to capture and contain the puppet so that Charlotte could be brought to the final reckoning. It would lead him to Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria simulator, where all the threads of this dark narrative would finally come together in a blaze of cleansing fire. But that final confrontation was still years away. First, we must understand the full scope of the tragedies that would unfold, the various incarnations of Fazbear Entertainment that would rise and fall, and the roles that both Henry and Charlotte would play in these events. The puppet would continue to haunt various locations. William Afton would eventually meet his fate at the hands of the very children he had murdered, only to return as Springtrap, a walking corpse trapped in the decaying remains of the Spring Bonnie suit. And Henry would watch, wait, and plan, preparing for the day when he could finally bring an end to the nightmare he had helped create. The story of Henry Emily is, at its core, a story about responsibility. It is about the things we create and the consequences of those creations. It is about trust betrayed and innocence lost. It is about a father's love for his daughter, a love that persisted beyond death and eventually found its expression in the most final of sacrifices. And it is about redemption, the possibility that even the most terrible mistakes can be, if not undone, then at least addressed, acknowledged, and ultimately burned away in the flames of justice. As we continue to explore Henry's journey through the 5 Nights at Freddy's timeline, keep in mind that this is a man who carried unimaginable burdens. He lost his daughter to murder. He watched as his life's work became a prison for innocent souls. he discovered that his best friend was a monster. And yet he persevered, driven by guilt, love, and an unwavering determination to make things right. His story is one of the most emotionally complex in the entire franchise, and understanding it fully requires us to examine every aspect of his character, his relationships, and his ultimate fate. So settle in, dear listeners. The night is long, and there is much more to tell. The tale of Henry Emily has only just begun. The year 1985 brought fresh horrors to the Fazbear Entertainment franchise. Horrors that would compound Henry Emily's grief and cement William Afton's legacy as one of fiction's most prolific killers. 2 years had passed since Charlotte's murder and the bite of '83. Fredbear's family diner had closed its doors, but the dream of animatronic entertainment had not died. A new location, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, had opened, featuring the 4 animatronics that would become synonymous with the franchise: Freddy Fazbear, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy. On June 26, 1985, William Afton donned the spring Bonnie suit once more. This time, his targets were not singular. 5 children attended what was supposed to be a day of fun and celebration at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Their names, as we would later learn through various sources in the franchise, were Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz, and Cassidy. They were young, innocent, and completely unaware of the danger that lurked within the friendly confines of the pizzeria. William, using the spring Bonnie costume to appear as one of the restaurant's beloved mascots, lured these children one by one into a back room. The room was designated as a safe room, ironically named, given what would transpire within its walls. These safe rooms were designed to be invisible to the animatronics programming, places where maintenance could be performed without triggering the character's automated behaviors. William had identified this blind spot in his own creations and exploited it for murder. What happened to those 5 children in that safe room was the stuff of nightmares. William killed them all, then stuffed their bodies into the animatronic suits to hide the evidence. Gabriel's body was placed inside Freddy Fazbear. Jeremy was stuffed into Bonnie. Susie, who had been lured with the promise of seeing her recently deceased dog Sparky, was placed inside Chica. Fritz was stuffed into Foxy, and Cassidy, the 5th victim, was placed inside an old golden bear suit, one that may have been the original Fredbear or a similar model, which would become known as Golden Freddy. The newspaper clippings that appear as rare Easter eggs in the original Five Nights at Freddy's game describe what happened next. The children were reported missing. Video surveillance identified a suspect, and someone was apprehended. However, the bodies were never found, and without definitive evidence, no conviction was secured. The suspect, widely believed to be William Afton, was released. Justice had failed those 5 children, just as it had failed Charlotte before them. But something happened in the aftermath of these murders that changed everything. The spirits of the murdered children did not simply pass on, whether through their own desperate will to survive, through some property of the animatronic suits themselves, or through the intervention of Charlotte's spirit in the puppet. These 5 children possessed the animatronics in which their bodies had been hidden. The Give Gifts, Give Life minigame from Five Nights at Freddy's 2 depicts this process, showing the puppet approaching lifeless bodies and somehow facilitating their transfer into the animatronic suits. Charlotte, already possessing the puppet and having experienced this supernatural transition herself, appears to have played a crucial role in guiding these new spirits into their mechanical prisons. Whether this was an act of mercy, giving them a second chance at some form of existence, or whether it was something more complex, the result was clear. Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, and Golden Freddy were now possessed by the vengeful spirits of murdered children, and those spirits, confused and angry, began to act out in violent ways. The possessed animatronics could not distinguish between innocent night guards and their actual killer. They operated on programming designed to identify adults as potential threats. and their traumatized spirits reinforced this behavior with supernatural rage. Night guard after night guard fell victim to these haunted machines, stuffed into spare animatronic suits in a grotesque mirror of what had been done to the children themselves. The newspapers mention multiple deaths and disappearances at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, including the bodies reported found and the suspicious smell emanating from the animatronics. For Henry Emily, watching from whatever distance he had established between himself and Fazbear Entertainment, this must have been agonizing. 5 more children were dead. 5 more souls were trapped in the animatronics he had helped create, and his own daughter Charlotte was somehow at the center of it all, her possessed form in the puppet guiding these new spirits into their prisons of metal and plastic. The wound he had suffered with Charlotte's death was indeed bleeding out to affect others, just as he would later describe. The original Freddy Fazbear's Pizza eventually closed due to the combination of negative publicity, health code violations related to the decaying smell coming from the animatronics, and the general atmosphere of unease that surrounded the establishment. But Fazbear Entertainment was not finished. The franchise would rise again, multiple times, each iteration bringing new tragedies and new additions to the haunted animatronic roster. The year 1987 saw the opening of a newly renovated Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, this time featuring an updated cast of animatronics. The toy animatronics, as they would come to be known, were sleeker, more advanced versions of the original characters. Toy Freddy, Toy Bonnie, Toy Chica, and a character called Mangle, who was supposed to be Toy Foxy before children kept disassembling and reassembling her, until she became a twisted mess of parts, entertained guests at the new location. The puppet was also present, kept dormant in the prize corner by the constant playing of a phone guy, the unseen instructor who guides players through the first several games in the series, provides much of what we know about this period through his recorded messages. He mentions that someone using a spare yellow suit has been sneaking around the back of the restaurant, a clear reference to William Afton continuing his murderous activities. He discusses the criminal database installed in the new animatronics, designed to identify predators, but clearly failing to catch the most dangerous one of all. And he speaks of the original restaurant owner being missing for years, a reference to Henry's disappearance from the company. The 1987 location would not last long either. Another incident, known as the Bite of '87, occurred during a birthday party. Unlike the Bite of '83, which involved Fredbear and William Afton's youngest son, this incident involved one of the new animatronics biting a person, believed to be a security guard named Jeremy Fitzgerald, and removing a portion of their frontal lobe. The victim survived, but the incident was catastrophic for the restaurant's reputation. The location closed shortly after, and the toy animatronics were scrapped. Through all of these events, Henry remained in the background. His absence from the company he had co-founded spoke volumes about his state of mind. He could not bear to be directly involved with an enterprise so stained by death, yet he could not fully abandon it either. His daughter's spirit remained trapped in the puppet. His creations continued to serve as vessels for murdered children's souls. And William Afton, despite the mounting evidence against him, continued to evade justice. The years that followed represented a kind of limbo for everyone involved. Fazbear Entertainment continued to attempt revivals, each one ending in failure and further tragedy. A smaller Freddy Fazbear's Pizza operated for a time in the early 1990s. The location featured in the original Five Nights at Freddy's game. This was a stripped-down operation, using the original animatronics that had been salvaged from the first Pizzeria. Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy, still possessed by the spirits of Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, and Fritz, continued their nightly hunts for any adult unfortunate enough to take the night guard position. It was during this period that William Afton made what he believed would be his final visit to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. The restaurant was scheduled to close permanently, and William returned to dismantle the animatronics. His motivation for this is unclear. Perhaps he wanted to destroy the evidence of his crimes. Perhaps he was attempting to harvest the remnant contained within the possessed machines. Whatever his reason, his actions triggered a response from the spirits he had created. The Follow Me minigames from Five Nights at Freddy's 3 depict what happened next. Playing as Freddy, we watch as a mysterious purple figure lures the animatronics to a back room one by one, then destroys them. The spirits of the children are freed from their animatronic prisons, visible as glowing orbs in the pixelated graphics. But freedom from the animatronics did not mean William had escaped their vengeance. The five spirits cornered William Afton in the safe room where he had murdered them years before. Terrified and desperate, William saw only one means of escape. The old spring Bonnie suit was still there, gathering dust in the corner. He climbed inside, perhaps believing that the spirits would be afraid of the costume that had been used to kill them, or perhaps simply not thinking clearly in his panic. What he failed to account for was the deterioration of the spring lock mechanisms over the years. The safe room was damp. Water had leaked in over time, and spring locks, as we have discussed, are catastrophically sensitive to moisture. As William struggled inside the suit, the spring locks failed. The animatronic components snapped back into position with lethal force, piercing his body in dozens of places. The spring Bonnie suit, instrument of so many murders, became William Afton's tomb. But death would not be the end for William Afton. His own experiments with Remnant, his exposure to the supernatural forces at play in these possessed animatronics, or perhaps simply the overwhelming force of his own malevolent will, caused him to persist beyond death. He became Springtrap, a walking corpse trapped inside a rotting animatronic rabbit suit, driven by hatred and an insatiable desire to kill. The abandoned Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, with Springtrap locked inside its sealed safe room, sat empty for 3 decades. The spirits of the murdered children, freed from their animatronic prisons but unable to move on while their killer still existed in some form, lingered in a state of unrest. Charlotte, still possessing the puppet, continued her vigil, waiting for something, perhaps for her father to finally act, perhaps for the opportunity to bring true closure to the tragedy that had defined her existence. For Henry, these years must have been spent in preparation. He could not move against William while his former friend was still in some sense alive. He needed to wait for the right moment, the right circumstances. He needed to gather all the possessed entities together in one place, including his own daughter, and end them all simultaneously. It was a plan that required patience, resources, and an absolute willingness to sacrifice everything, including his own life. During this period, Henry appears to have conducted extensive research into the supernatural phenomena surrounding the animatronics. The insanity ending of Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator reveals that he obtained blueprints for the Scooper, William's device for extracting Remnant. He learned about Circus Baby's entertainment and rentals, the underground facility where William had created the Funtime animatronics, machines designed from the ground. He discovered that Elizabeth Afton, William's own daughter, had been killed by Circus Baby and possessed the animatronic, becoming yet another spirit trapped in a mechanical prison. The scope of William's crimes was staggering. He had killed Henry's daughter. He had killed at least 5 other children at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. He had designed animatronics specifically intended to murder. He had killed his own daughter through his creation, and throughout it all, he had evaded any real consequence, protected by the lack of evidence, the absurdity of the truth, and his own cunning. Henry's response to this knowledge shaped everything that would come next. He could not simply expose William to the authorities. What would he say? that his former business partner was a serial killer who had been transformed into a zombie animatronic rabbit, that the spirits of murdered children possessed robot entertainers? The truth was too impossible to be believed. And by this point, William, in his Springtrap form, was not something conventional law enforcement could deal with anyway. No, Henry needed a different approach. He needed to create a situation where all the loose ends could be tied up at once. He needed to bring together Springtrap, the Funtime animatronics that had merged into Molten Freddy, Circus Baby, who now called herself Scrap Baby, and the puppet who still contained his daughter's spirit. He needed to lure them all to a single location, trap them there, and destroy them utterly, freeing the souls within and eliminating any trace of the nightmare that had consumed so many lives. The plan that Henry devised was elegant in its simplicity and brutal in its execution. He would open a new Freddy Fazbear's pizza location, a franchise pizzeria that would serve as bait. The possessed animatronics, drawn by whatever force attracted them to Fazbear Entertainment properties, would come. He would have someone salvage them, bringing them inside under the pretense of recovering valuable vintage equipment. And then, when all were gathered, he would burn the building to the ground with everyone inside, including himself. This brings us to Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator, the game where Henry finally steps out of the shadows and takes center stage. Released in December 2017, the game initially presents itself as a simple business simulator, tasking players with managing their own Freddy Fazbear's Pizza franchise. You purchase decorations, games, and animatronics. You manage your budget. You try to avoid lawsuits and maintain a positive atmosphere. It seems almost comically mundane compared to the horror of previous entries in the series. But beneath this innocent facade lurks something far darker. At the end of each in-game day, players are presented with the opportunity to salvage animatronics found in the back alley. These salvages are where the true horror of Pizzeria Simulator reveals itself. The animatronics you encounter are not the friendly entertainers of franchise lore. They are the possessed, the corrupted, the damned. Molten Freddy appears first, a tangled mass of wires and animatronic parts that represents the merged Funtime animatronics, collectively known as Ennard, who had previously escaped from Circus Baby's entertainment and rentals by hollowing out Michael Afton and using his body as a disguise. Scraptrap appears, a deteriorated version of Springtrap, William Afton's undead form now even more damaged and decay-ridden than before. Scrap Baby appears, Elizabeth Afton's possessed animatronic, rebuilt and more dangerous than ever. And Lefty appears, a mysterious black bear animatronic whose true purpose would only become clear at the game's conclusion. The player, believed to be Michael Afton based on various contextual clues, is guided through this process by recorded instructions delivered via the voice on those tapes belongs to a character credited only as Cassette Man, but whom we now know to be Henry Emily himself. His instructions are matter-of-fact, professional, designed to guide the player through the salvage process while revealing as little as possible about the true purpose of their work. Henry's voice, as performed by the voice actor, carries a weight of exhaustion and determination. This is a man who has waited decades for this moment. This is a man who has watched everything he built become corrupted, who has carried the guilt of his daughter's death and the deaths of so many others, who has spent years planning this final confrontation. And now, finally, all the pieces are coming together. The animatronics you salvage are not simply added to your pizzeria's roster of entertainers. They are trapped in a labyrinth of underground passages beneath the building, passages that Henry has designed to be inescapable. The sounds of children that emanate from within the pizzeria draw the animatronics deeper into the maze, their programming and their possessed souls compelling them to seek out potential victims. But there are no children in those passages. There are only the sounds, recordings designed to keep the animatronics occupied while the final phase of Henry's plan is prepared. Lefty deserves special attention in understanding Henry's plan. This animatronic is not one of William's creations, nor is it possessed by one of his victims in the conventional sense. Lefty is Henry's creation, designed for one specific purpose: to capture the puppet and bring Charlotte to the final reckoning. The name Lefty stands for lure, encapsulate, fuse, transport, and extract, describing the animatronic's function. Inside Lefty's body, contained and restrained, is the puppet, and within the puppet, Charlotte's spirit remains. Henry built Lefty because he knew that Charlotte would not simply come to the pizzeria on her own. The puppet had spent decades protecting the other murdered children, guiding them, watching over them. Charlotte's instinct was to protect, not to seek out danger. So Henry created a mechanism to bring her to him, to ensure that she would be present for the final moment. It was, in a sense, an act of paternal love, twisted by the necessities of the situation. He was capturing his own daughter, trapping her so that he could free her. The player's role in all of this is both crucial and somewhat mysterious. Henry addresses them directly in several recordings, acknowledging that they were not the intended recipient of the job listing that brought them to this place. To you, my brave volunteer, who somehow found this job listing not intended for you, he says in his final speech. The implications are significant. Someone else was supposed to be the night guard, the one who would salvage the animatronics and ultimately die in the fire, but circumstances brought a different person to the role. Someone whom Henry seems to respect even as he prepares to sacrifice them. The player character is widely believed to be Michael Afton, William's eldest son. Michael had spent years trying to undo the damage his father had caused, first at the behest of his father and later in opposition to him. He had survived being scooped by Ennard, his body becoming a walking corpse animated by some combination of remnant and sheer determination. He had burned down Fazbear's fright in an attempt to destroy Springtrap, and now, at the end of his journey, he had found his way to Henry's trap, whether by accident or design. The true ending of Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria simulator, known as the completion ending, is unlocked by successfully salvaging all 4 animatronics and surviving through Saturday, the final day of gameplay. When the player attempts to log off on this final night, something different happens. Instead of the usual end-of-day routine, the lights go out. A voice breaks the silence, and Henry Emily, after decades in the shadows, finally speaks directly to the souls he has gathered. "Connection terminated," he begins, interrupting Scrap Baby mid-sentence as she gloats about the children she believes are within reach. "I'm sorry to interrupt you, Elizabeth, if you still even remember that name, but I'm afraid you've been misinformed. You are not here to receive a gift, nor have you been called here by the individual you assume. Although you have indeed been called." The speech that follows is one of the most powerful and emotionally resonant moments in the entire Five Nights at Freddy's franchise. Henry explains the trap he has constructed. The labyrinth with no exit, the maze with no prize. He tells the animatronics that their hunt for children has been futile, that the sounds they followed led nowhere, that they have been chasing echoes in an elaborate prison designed just for them. The building, he reveals, has been designed to burn. There is no escape for anyone, including himself. And to you, my brave volunteer, who somehow found this job listing not intended for you, Henry continues, addressing the player character directly. Although there was a way out planned for you, I have a feeling that's not what you want. I have a feeling that you are right where you want to be. I am remaining as well. I am nearby. The temperature indicator that has been a minor gameplay mechanic throughout Pizzeria Simulator appears in the corner of the screen as Henry speaks. Climbing steadily higher, the building is burning, the fire is spreading, and everyone inside is going to die. Henry addresses each of the trapped souls in turn. To Elizabeth, William's daughter trapped in Scrap Baby, he offers something approaching compassion, acknowledging that her father set her on the path that led here but urging her to find rest. To the amalgamation of spirits in Molten Freddy, he speaks of endings and peace. To William, trapped in Scraptrap, his words are far less gentle. Although for one of you, the darkest pit of hell has opened to swallow you whole, Henry declares, his voice hardening with righteous anger. So don't keep the devil waiting, old friend, old friend. Those two words carry decades of history. They carry the memory of two men building dreams together, of a partnership corrupted by darkness, of a friendship destroyed by murder. Henry and William were friends once, truly friends. And now, at the end of everything, Henry condemns his former friend to eternal damnation with those final bitter words. But the most emotionally powerful part of Henry's speech is reserved for his daughter. His voice softens as he addresses Charlotte, acknowledging that he knew she would return, that it was in her nature to protect the innocent. He apologizes for the day she died, for the fact that no one was there to save her the way she saved others. I should have known you wouldn't be content to disappear. Not my daughter, he says, his voice breaking with emotion. I couldn't save you then, so let me save you now. It's time to rest. For you, and for those you have carried in your arms. As the temperature continues to rise and the flames consume the building, images appear on screen. We see the scene from Take Cake to the children. Charlotte crying outside the restaurant. We see the security puppet cradling her body in the rain. We see the puppet itself, its painted face somehow conveying both sorrow and peace. And then the screen fades to orange, to the color of fire, and Henry speaks his final words. This ends for all of us. End communication. The fire consumes everything. The animatronics burn. The remnant that kept the spirits bound to their mechanical prisons is destroyed by heat. William Afton, Henry Emily, Michael Afton, Charlotte Emily, Elizabeth Afton, and all the murdered children whose souls had been trapped for so long are finally freed. The nightmare that began with two men and their dream of animatronic entertainment ends in flames, ash, and the long-delayed release of innocent souls. A brief epilogue follows, presented in the style of the tutorial unit that has guided players through the business management aspects of the game. This recording clearly pre-recorded and never intended to be heard under these circumstances, thanks the player for their service and informs them that Fazbear Entertainment is no longer a corporate entity. A certificate of completion appears on the main menu, marking the true end of the game. But the story of Henry Emily does not end with his death. His actions in Pizzeria Simulator established him as one of the most significant characters in Five Nights at Freddy's lore, a figure whose influence extends beyond the games themselves into the novel trilogy, the film adaptations, and the broader mythology of the franchise. Understanding his legacy requires us to examine how he has been portrayed in these other media and what those portrayals tell us about his character. The Five Nights at Freddy's franchise exists across multiple media, and Henry Emily's story, while consistent in its broad strokes, takes on different dimensions depending on which version of the narrative we examine. The novel trilogy, beginning with the Silver Eyes and continuing through the Twisted Ones and the Fourth Closet, presents a version of Henry that is in some ways more detailed and in other ways significantly different from his game counterpart. Understanding both versions enriches our appreciation of the character and reveals the thematic concerns that Scott Cawthon and his collaborators have woven throughout the franchise. The Silver Eyes novel, first published in December 2015 and later released in paperback through Scholastic in 2016, introduced readers to the character of Charlotte Emily, known as Charlie. In this version of the story, Charlie is the protagonist, a 17-year-old girl returning to her hometown of Hurricane, Utah, to attend a memorial for her childhood friend Michael Brooks, who went missing 10 years earlier. The novel establishes that Charlie's father, Henry, was the co-owner of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza alongside William Afton, and that he was responsible for building the animatronics that would become so central to the franchise's mythology. The novel Henry is presented as a man of considerable genius and deep emotional complexity. He invented the spring lock technology that enabled the hybrid animatronic costume suits. He created the original animatronics with a childlike sense of wonder, wanting to bring joy to children and families. The Freddy Files, an official companion guide to the games, states that Henry and William's partnership history and how their views of the animatronics evolved over time in the books actually impacted the story of the games, suggesting a deliberate creative connection between the two versions of the character. However, the novel version of Henry's story diverges significantly from the game version in one crucial aspect: his death. In the novels, Henry commits suicide in July 1985, constructing a robot specifically designed to end his life. This robotic executioner resembles the puppet in appearance, with tear-like patterns on its face that echo Charlotte's possessed animatronic form. Henry built this machine in the depths of his despair, overwhelmed by the loss of his children, the horrors that had unfolded at his restaurants, and the guilt of his perceived failures. Before taking his own life, Henry left a note for his sister, Aunt Jen, with cryptic instructions. He told her that he had done permanent damage to himself, and asked her to keep something called the fourth closet shut. He also requested that she demolish his house if everything was done correctly. These instructions hint at the existence of secrets within Henry's workshop, secrets that would become central to the plot of The Fourth Closet, the third novel in the trilogy. The revelation that Henry committed suicide in the novel continuity contrasts sharply with his game counterpart, who lived for decades after Charlotte's death before finally sacrificing himself in the Pizzeria simulator fire. This difference is significant because it represents two different approaches to grief and responsibility. Novel Henry succumbs to his despair, unable to bear the weight of what has happened and lacking the will to continue. Game Henry channels his grief into a decades-long plan for revenge and redemption, refusing to die until he has made things right. Another major difference in the novel trilogy involves the character of Charlie herself. While we have discussed Charlie as the spirit who possesses the puppet in the game canon, the novel presents a far more complex situation. Throughout the Silver Eyes and the Twisted Ones, Charlie appears to be a normal, albeit traumatized, teenage girl. She has memories of her childhood, of her father, of the tragedy that struck her family. She has friends, romantic interests, and all the hallmarks of human existence. The Fourth Closet reveals the truth. Charlie is not human. She is an animatronic, one of 4 robotic versions of Henry's daughter that he created in his grief-stricken obsession. The real Charlotte Emily, the human child, was murdered by William Afton when she was very young, just as in the game canon. Unable to accept this loss, Henry used his engineering genius to create mechanical replicas of his daughter at different stages of life: a baby, a young child, a teenager, and an adult. The Charlie we follow throughout the novels is the third version, the teenage model, implanted with false memories that she believed were real. This revelation recontextualizes everything we thought we knew about the novel version of Charlotte, and by extension, about Henry himself. His grief drove him not just to despair, but to a kind of madness, an obsession with recreating what he had lost. The animatronics he built were not merely entertainment devices, but attempts to bring his daughter back, to fill the void her death had created. The fourth closet of his instructions refers literally to a hidden space in his workshop where the fourth Charlotte robot, the adult version, was stored and which would eventually be possessed by Elizabeth Afton's spirit. The character who discovers and exploits these Charlie robots is Elizabeth Afton, William's daughter, who in the novel continuity possesses Circus Baby and eventually takes over the fourth Charlotte model. This creates a dark mirror between the two daughters. Charlotte, the innocent victim, recreated as robots by a loving father driven mad by grief, and Elizabeth, corrupted by her father's evil, stealing those robots to continue her family's legacy of harm. Henry's suicide robot, the machine he built to end his own life, becomes an important element in the novel's climax. Charlie, having learned the truth about her nature and facing off against Elizabeth in the stolen fourth Charlotte body, uses Henry's creation as a weapon. The robot kills both of them, Elizabeth and Charlie, in a final confrontation that echoes the Pizzeria simulator, ending in its finality. The father's tool of self-destruction becomes the daughter's means of ending the conflict, a poetic symmetry that speaks to the deep connections between parent and child that run throughout the Five Nights at Freddy's narrative. The relationship between the novel continuity and the game continuity is complex. Scott Cawthon has stated that the novels exist in a separate universe from the games, that they are not direct adaptations of game events. However, he has also indicated that concepts introduced in the novels can inform and impact the game's storyline. Henry Emily himself is a prime example. The character was established in the novels before he was confirmed to exist in the games, and many details from the novel version, such as his role as co-founder of the restaurants and creator of the animatronics, were later incorporated into the game canon. This relationship between continuities allows fans to use the novels as a lens through which to interpret ambiguous game lore, while also recognizing that the two versions of events are not identical. The novel Henry, who commits suicide in despair, and the game Henry, who survives for decades and orchestrates an elaborate revenge, represent two possible outcomes for the same character facing the same tragedy. In one version, grief wins. In the other, determination prevails. Both versions are tragic, but the game version offers something closer to redemption. The Five Nights at Freddy's films have added yet another dimension to Henry Emily's characterization. The first film, released in October 2023, focused primarily on Mike Schmidt and his sister Abby, with William Afton serving as the main antagonist. Henry was not present in this film, but his existence was implied through the backstory of the restaurants and animatronics. The character would have to wait for the sequel to make his live-action debut. Five Nights at Freddy's 2, released in December 2025, finally brought Henry Emily to the big screen, portrayed by actor Skeet Ulrich. This casting choice reunited Ulrich with Matthew Lillard, who plays William Afton, the two actors having previously starred together in the original Scream film decades earlier. This meta-textual connection between the two actors mirrors the in-story connection between their characters. Two men whose partnership and friendship became the foundation for both the Fazbear Entertainment empire and its legacy of horror. In the film version, Henry appears as a disheveled, grief-stricken man who has never recovered from the loss of his daughter Charlotte. The film sets Charlotte's death in 1982 at the first Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location, where she witnesses William Afton in his yellow rabbit suit luring a child. When Charlotte tries to alert the adults around her and is ignored, she takes matters into her own hands, attempting to rescue the child herself. William catches her and fatally stabs her backstage. Charlotte falls through a trapdoor into the arms of the marionette animatronic, and her spirit possesses it. 2 decades later, as stories of the murders at Freddy's become popular and inspire a horror festival called FizzFest, Henry sees this commercialization of tragedy as deeply disrespectful to his daughter's memory. He launches a boycott campaign with the slogan, "Freddy's is murder," posting flyers around Minnesota that include his phone number for anyone who wants to join his cause. This brings him into contact with Mike Schmidt, the film's protagonist, who calls Henry after seeing one of his posters. The film version of Henry represents another iteration of the character's response to grief. Unlike the novel Henry who committed suicide, or the game Henry who spent decades planning revenge, the film Henry has channeled his loss into a kind of activism, trying to prevent others from forgetting what happened and from profiting off the deaths of innocent children. His meeting with Mike allows him to share information about Charlotte, about Fazbear Entertainment, and about the darkness that lurks beneath the franchise's colorful facade. Henry provides Mike with Charlotte's music box, the same device that keeps the marionette dormant in the games, asking him to leave it at the restaurant for Charlotte. This gesture suggests that even after all these years, Henry still thinks of his daughter, still wants to bring her comfort, still cannot fully let go of the child he lost. The music box becomes a plot device in the film, but it also serves as a symbol of parental love, persisting beyond death and separation. The film version of Henry leaves threads open for potential future appearances. An end credits scene shows Henry leaving a recorded message for Mike, revealing more details about his history with William Afton, and warning about the marionette. Loud noises interrupt the recording, suggesting that danger has found Henry as well. Whether future films will continue Henry's story, perhaps leading to a film version of the Pizzeria simulator's fiery conclusion, remains to be seen. What is consistent across all versions of Henry Emily is his role as a creator whose creations were corrupted by evil, and as a father whose love for his daughter defines his character even in death. The game Henry speaks to Charlotte in his final moments, apologizing for failing to protect her and offering her the release she has earned through decades of protecting others. The novel Henry builds robot versions of Charlotte in a desperate attempt to keep her with him. The film Henry distributes flyers and preserves her music box, refusing to let the world forget who she was. These different expressions of parental grief speak to something universal in the character's appeal. Henry Emily resonates with audiences not because of his technical genius or his role in the franchise's corporate history, but because his love for Charlotte is so clearly genuine, so painfully relatable. Anyone who has lost someone they love can understand the desire to bring them back, to make things right, to find some way to end the pain. Henry's various attempts to do this, whether through suicide, robot replicas, protest campaigns, or elaborate revenge schemes, represent different manifestations of the same fundamental grief. Beyond his immediate family connections, Henry's legacy extends to his contributions to animatronic technology and to Fazbear Entertainment itself. The spring-lock suits he invented, while dangerous, represented a genuine innovation in entertainment robotics. The characters he designed, Fredbear, Spring Bonnie, Freddy Fazbear, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy, have become iconic figures in gaming culture, recognized by millions who have never even played the games. The security puppet he created to protect Charlotte became the puppet that guided murdered children's souls into their animatronic hosts, making Henry indirectly responsible for both the creation and the haunting of the franchise's most memorable characters. The discovery of Secret of the Mimic, a game released in 2025 that explores the early history of Fazbear Entertainment, has added additional context to Henry's story. The game introduces Edwin Murray, a contractor who worked with Fazbear Entertainment in the 1970s and who appears to have had a close relationship with Henry. Audio logs from Edwin reference someone he calls Hen, a casual nickname that suggests familiarity and friendship. The game reveals that William Afton manipulated the contracts with Edwin's company, Murray's Costume Manor, ultimately causing Edwin's downfall and allowing Fazbear Entertainment to absorb his work and property. This revelation complicates our understanding of Henry's role in the early days of Fazbear Entertainment. Was Henry aware of William's manipulation of Edwin? Did he participate in it? Or was he also being deceived? The games do not provide clear answers, but they suggest that Henry and William's partnership was never the equal arrangement it may have appeared to be. William was always scheming, always manipulating, always positioning himself to benefit at others' expense. Henry may have been as much a victim of this manipulation as Edwin was, trusting his friend while remaining blind to his true nature. The insanity ending of Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria simulator hints at this complexity. In his recorded confession, Henry speaks of discovering the full scope of what William had done and of realizing that he, Henry, had been complicit in enabling it. "I have seen the thing that lurks in the darkness," he says. "I learned of something that should have never existed." His words suggest a gradual awakening to the truth, a process of investigation and discovery that revealed not just William's crimes, but Henry's own unwitting role in making them possible. This theme of complicity and responsibility runs throughout Henry's characterization. He did not kill anyone. He did not create animatronics designed to harm children, as William did with the Funtime animatronics. He did not possess the malevolent intent that drove his former friend, but he built the tools that made William's crimes possible. He trusted a man who would betray that trust in the most horrific way imaginable, and he failed to act for years, allowing more children to die while he remained in hiding. The fire at the end of Pizzeria Simulator is not just a tool for destroying the animatronics and freeing the trapped souls. It is also an act of self-judgment, a recognition by Henry that he too must face consequences for what happened. He does not exempt himself from the flames. He does not escape while the animatronics burn. He remains, dying alongside William, alongside the victims, alongside his own daughter. In death, he takes responsibility in a way he could not in life. Some fans have theorized about Henry's activities during the years between the various restaurant incidents. Could he have been the night guard at Fazbear's Fright, the horror attraction in Five Nights at Freddy's 3, the one who ultimately burned down the building with Springtrap inside? The connection is never explicitly confirmed, but the parallels are intriguing. Both situations involve someone working at night, alone, in a Fazbear Entertainment property. Both end in fire. Both represent attempts to destroy William Afton or his legacy. Other theories connect Henry to the mysterious character Old Man Consequences, who appears in Ultimate Custom Night Fishing beside a red lake. The character speaks cryptically about resting and about leaving the demon to his demons, advice that could be interpreted as coming from Henry, who has passed on and is encouraging others to do the same. These theories remain speculative, but they speak to the way Henry's presence is felt throughout the franchise even when he is not directly present. The question of what happened to Henry's wife, Charlotte's mother, is one that the games have never fully addressed. She is occasionally referenced as Mrs. Emily, but her fate remains unknown. Did she die before the events of the games? Did she and Henry separate due to the trauma of Charlotte's murder? Was she too consumed by grief to continue in the story? The absence of answers creates space for fan theories and future revelations, but it also underscores how alone Henry became in his quest for justice. By the time of Pizzeria Simulator, he appears to have no one left, no family, no friends, only his determination to end the nightmare. The character encyclopedia and other official reference materials have provided some additional details about Henry's physical appearance and personality. He is described as having dirty blonde hair and a chinstrap beard, wearing glasses, an orange flannel shirt, blue jean overalls, and brown shoes. This visual design, created by artist Lady Fizzy, who has contributed concept art to the franchise, presents Henry as someone practical and working class, a creator who gets his hands dirty rather than simply delegating to others. The image contrasts with William Afton's more calculating, businessman aesthetic, visually distinguishing the two former partners. Personality-wise, Henry is described as soft-spoken, stoic, serious, and stern. He is not someone who shows emotion easily, preferring to keep his feelings contained behind a professional exterior. But as his final speech in Pizzeria Simulator demonstrates, there is tremendous depth of feeling beneath that controlled surface. When he speaks to Charlotte, his voice breaks with the weight of decades of suppressed grief. When he condemns William to hell, there is cold fury in every word. Henry's emotional restraint makes the moments when that restraint fails all the more powerful. The voice acting for Henry in Pizzeria Simulator was provided by Dave Steele, whose performance captures the character's exhaustion, determination, and buried emotion. Interestingly, the confirmation that Cassette Man was indeed Henry Emily came not from the game itself, but from P.J. Haywood, the voice actor for William Afton, who revealed the connection during an interview on the FNAF show. This revelation was reportedly made without Scott Cawthon's explicit knowledge or consent, suggesting that even the creator was surprised by how quickly the mystery was solved. As we consider Henry Emily's place in the Five Nights at Freddy's mythology, it becomes clear that he serves as a moral counterweight to William Afton. Where William is selfish, Henry is selfless. Where William kills children, Henry tries to save them, even if only by ending their suffering decades after the fact. Where William persists through evil, refusing to accept death and returning again and again, Henry accepts death willingly, even eagerly, seeing it as the price he must pay for his role in what happened. This contrast extends to their relationships with their children. William's parenting is marked by neglect, manipulation, and ultimately violence. He allows his youngest son to be terrorized and killed. He creates an animatronic that murders his daughter Elizabeth. He sends his eldest son Michael on missions that nearly kill him. His relationship with his family is transactional at best, predatory at worst. Henry, by contrast, is defined by his love for Charlotte. Everything he does after her death is motivated by that love. He creates the security puppet to protect her. He builds robot replicas of her in a desperate attempt to keep her with him. He spends decades planning a way to free her spirit from the puppet. His final words to her are words of apology and love, offering her the rest she has earned. Where William destroys his family, Henry tries to preserve his, even if those attempts are ultimately doomed to fail. The parallel between Charlotte and Elizabeth further emphasizes this contrast. Both are daughters of the Fazbear Entertainment founders. Both are killed and possess animatronics. Both appear in Pizzeria Simulator and are addressed by Henry in his final speech. But where Charlotte possessed the puppet and used her second existence to protect other children, guiding their souls into animatronics so they could have a chance at the revenge she could not take herself, Elizabeth possessed Circus Baby and became a predator like her father, eager to kill and corrupt. Henry's address to Elizabeth in the completion ending is notably different from his words to Charlotte. He acknowledges her, calls her by her true name, but there is distance in his words. He understands that she was set on her path by her father, that she was in some sense also a victim. But he cannot offer her the same tenderness he offers Charlotte, cannot view her with the same love. She is William's daughter, and while that does not make her evil by default, it does mean that her corruption is tangled up with William's legacy in ways that Charlotte's victimhood is not. This brings us to a question that fans have debated extensively. Does Henry bear any responsibility for what happened to Elizabeth or to the other children who died at Fazbear Entertainment properties after Charlotte? He was not directly involved in those murders. He had distanced himself from the company by the time most of them occurred. But he did nothing to stop William. despite increasingly obvious evidence that something was deeply wrong. He remained in hiding while children died. He could have gone to the authorities, could have tried to warn people, could have done something other than simply wait. The insanity-ending confession suggests that Henry struggles with this question himself. His words are heavy with guilt, with the sense that he should have done more, should have acted sooner, should have stopped William before the body count grew so high. The fire at Pizzeria Simulator is not just a tool for destroying William, but also an act of atonement for Henry's own failures. He condemns himself to the flames alongside his former friend, accepting that his inaction makes him at least partially culpable for what happened. This moral complexity is part of what makes Henry Emily such a compelling character. He is not a simple hero who swoops in to save the day. He is a broken man who made mistakes, who failed when it mattered most, and who spent decades trying to find a way to make things right. His ultimate success in destroying William and freeing the trapped souls does not erase his failures. It merely concludes a story that has been marked by tragedy from beginning to end. To truly appreciate Henry Emily's significance in the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise, we must examine not just what happens to him, but what he represents thematically. The story of Five Nights at Freddy's is, at its core, a story about the consequences of our creations. It asks what happens when the things we build take on lives of their own, when our inventions become instruments of horror, when our dreams curdle into nightmares. Henry Emily embodies this theme more completely than any other character in the franchise. Consider the animatronics themselves. Henry built them with love and care, with a desire to bring joy to children. He designed the spring-lock suits to create more immersive entertainment experiences. He created the security puppet specifically to protect his own daughter. Every one of these creations was born from good intentions, yet every one of them became something terrible. The spring-lock suits became instruments of murder, and, eventually, William Afton's undead prison. The animatronics became vessels for the souls of murdered children. The security puppet became the puppet, guiding more souls into mechanical captivity. Henry's legacy of creation is inseparable from the horror that creation enabled. This theme resonates beyond the fiction of Five Nights at Freddy's into broader questions about technology, responsibility, and unintended consequences. We live in an age where the things we create, from algorithms to artificial intelligence, have impacts their creators never anticipated. Social media platforms designed to connect people have become vectors for misinformation and radicalization. Tools created to make life easier have disrupted industries and displaced workers. The scientists who first split the atom surely did not envision Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Henry Emily, the animatronic engineer whose inventions enabled a serial killer, speaks to this contemporary anxiety about the gap between intention and outcome. But Henry also represents something more personal, the experience of surviving trauma that we could not prevent. Charlotte's murder was not Henry's fault in any direct sense. He did not kill her. He did not intend for her to be in danger. He built the security puppet specifically to protect her. Yet she died anyway, and Henry spent the rest of his life carrying that grief. This experience of powerlessness in the face of tragedy, of being unable to protect the people we love despite our best efforts, is Henry's story speaks to anyone who has ever asked themselves what they could have done differently, who has ever wondered if they are somehow responsible for a loss they could not prevent. The years Henry spent between Charlotte's murder and the events of Pizzeria Simulator represent a kind of living death. He withdrew from the company he had built. He disappeared from public life. He consumed himself with investigation and planning, piecing together the full scope of William's crimes. This period of isolation and obsession is not depicted directly in the games, but we can infer its nature from the result. Henry emerged with detailed knowledge of Remnant, of the Scooper, of the various animatronics and their origins. He emerged with a fully formed plan to gather all the possessed entities together and destroy them. This level of preparation required years of work, years of sacrifice, years of putting everything else aside in service of a single goal. One of the most poignant aspects of Henry's story is that he could not save Charlotte himself. Despite all his genius, all his planning, all his determination, the best he could do was end her suffering. He could not bring her back. He could not undo what William had done. He could only ensure that her spirit, trapped in the puppet for decades, was finally allowed to rest. The limitations of Henry's power, the recognition that some losses cannot be recovered from, only mitigated, gives his story a tragic dimension that pure heroism would lack. The creation of Lefty deserves closer examination in this context. Henry built an animatronic whose sole purpose was to capture and contain his own daughter. Think about what that must have required emotionally to design a machine that would trap Charlotte, that would bring her to a place where she would be destroyed, even if that destruction was intended as liberation. Henry had to treat his daughter as a target, as something to be captured and eliminated, even though he loved her more than anything. The technical achievement of Lefty is impressive, but the emotional toll of its creation must have been immense. Some fans have questioned whether Henry's plan was truly the only option, or whether his determination to die alongside the animatronics reflects something darker than heroic sacrifice. Could he have found another way to destroy them, one that did not require his own death? Could he have tried to free the souls without killing himself in the process? The text of the game does not engage with these questions directly, but they hover around Henry's choices, his refusal to escape the fire, his statement that he is remaining as well, could be read as suicide disguised as necessity. A man who has been waiting for permission to end his own pain, finally finding it. This interpretation aligns with the novel version of Henry, who explicitly commits suicide using a robot he built for that purpose. The game version is more ambiguous, presenting his death as a necessary component of the plan rather than a personal desire. But the ambiguity itself is significant. Henry has spent decades carrying guilt and grief that would break most people. He has lost his daughter, his friend, his business, his purpose. The fire at Pizzeria simulator gives him a way out, a way to end his suffering while also accomplishing something meaningful. Whether that makes him a hero or simply a man who found an acceptable reason to stop living is a question each player must answer for themselves. The relationship between Henry and William Afton is one of the most complex in the franchise, primarily because we know so little about its positive phase. We know they were friends. We know they were business partners. We know they built an entertainment empire together. But what were those early years actually like? What drew these two men together? What did they see in each other? The games show us only the aftermath of their friendship's destruction, never the friendship itself. Fan speculation has attempted to fill this gap. Some theorize that Henry was the idealist and William was the pragmatist, that their partnership worked because they balanced each other's weaknesses. Some suggest that William was always manipulating Henry, using him as a means to an end, and that their friendship was always one-sided. Others propose that William's darkness emerged gradually, that he was genuinely Henry's friend before something twisted him into a monster. Without canonical confirmation, all of these interpretations remain possible. What we can say with certainty is that Henry trusted William, and that trust was catastrophically misplaced. Henry allowed William access to his daughter, to his business, to his creations. He did not see the warning signs, or if he saw them, he did not act on them until it was too late. This failure of perception, This inability to recognize evil in someone he considered a friend haunts Henry throughout the story. His final words to William, condemning him to the darkest pit of hell, carry not just righteous anger but also the bitterness of betrayal. Henry trusted William. William killed Charlotte. That sequence of events defines everything that follows. The designation of William as old friend in Henry's final speech is particularly striking. Not former friend, which would acknowledge that the relationship is over. Not enemy, which would define their current status, but old friend, which invokes the history they share, the connection that once existed between them. Henry cannot simply hate William as a stranger. He must hate him as someone he once loved, someone he trusted, someone who was part of his life in ways that cannot be simply erased. The relationship may be over, but its shadow extends into the present, coloring everything Henry says and does. The question of whether Henry bears any direct responsibility for the murders is worth considering from a legal and moral perspective. In legal terms, Henry is clearly innocent. He did not kill anyone. He did not conspire with William. He did not knowingly enable the murders. He is a victim as much as any of the murdered children, his loss simply taking a different form than theirs. But morally, the situation is more complex. Henry built the tools William used. He created the animatronics that became prisons for the children's souls. He trusted someone he should not have trusted, failed to act when action might have saved lives, and spent years in hiding while more children died. This moral ambiguity is part of what makes Henry a compelling character rather than simply a sympathetic one. A purely innocent victim would not need to sacrifice himself in flames. A purely innocent man would not speak of guilt and failure the way Henry does in the insanity ending. Henry's decision to die alongside the animatronics is not just tactically necessary, but morally appropriate. He does not believe he deserves to survive when so many others have died. He does not believe he has earned the right to walk away from the consequences of what his creations became. The fire is penance as much as it is strategy. The legacy of Henry Emily extends beyond the events of Pizzeria Simulator and into the later games in the franchise. While Henry himself is dead, the consequences of his actions continue to ripple through the narrative. The fire at the pizzeria was supposed to be the end of everything, the final destruction of William Afton and the liberation of all the trapped souls. But as Five Nights at Freddy's, Help Wanted revealed, William found a way to survive yet again. In Help Wanted, it is revealed that Fazbear Entertainment created a virtual reality game incorporating scanned data from old animatronic circuit boards. Hidden within that data was something called Glitch Trap, a digital manifestation of William Afton's consciousness. The fire had destroyed William's physical form, but some essential part of him had been preserved in the technology Henry helped create, waiting for an opportunity to return. This revelation complicates Henry's apparent victory, suggesting that William cannot be truly destroyed, that his evil is somehow fundamental to the reality of the Five Nights at Freddy's universe. Five Nights at Freddy's. Security breach continues this thread, revealing that William, now calling himself Burntrap, has rebuilt himself beneath the Freddy Fazbear Mega Pizzaplex. The character Gregory, with the help of a reprogrammed Glamrock Freddy, confronts this latest incarnation of William in the game's various endings. One particular location in Security Breach stands out for its connection to Henry. A room filled with burning mechanisms that fans have theorized is the same location where Henry initiated the Pizzeria Simulator fire. The room is later referred to as an oven by Cassie in the Ruin DLC, suggesting that its purpose as a trap was recognized by subsequent inhabitants of the Pizzaplex. The presence of this room beneath the Mega Pizzaplex raises questions about what happened after the Pizzeria Simulator fire. Did someone, perhaps Fazbear Entertainment, build the pizzaplex on or near the site of Henry's trap? Was the oven preserved as some kind of memorial, or was it simply too integrated into the structure to be removed? The connection suggests that Henry's final act left a physical mark on the world, a scar in the landscape that subsequent generations built around without fully understanding. The Blob, a massive amalgamation of animatronic parts that appears in Security Breach's endings, represents another legacy of Henry's final confrontation. This creature contains elements of the animatronics that burned in the Pizzeria simulator fire, including the puppet's mask. However, fans have noted that the mask lacks the tear marks that characterized the puppet while Charlotte inhabited it, suggesting that Charlotte's spirit may have genuinely been freed in the fire, even if the physical animatronic was not completely destroyed. If this interpretation is correct, then Henry succeeded in at least part of his goal, saving his daughter, even if he could not permanently destroy William. The possibility that Charlotte achieved peace while other elements of the nightmare persist speaks to the personal nature of Henry's quest. He was never trying to save the world or destroy all evil. He was trying to free his daughter and punish the man who murdered her. The broader consequences, the continued existence of Fazbear Entertainment, the persistence of William Afton in digital form, the creation of new animatronics and new tragedies, were not his primary concern. Henry was a father first and a hero second, and his priorities reflected that. This focus on the personal over the universal is another aspect of Henry's characterization that sets him apart from typical heroic archetypes. A traditional hero might try to prevent all future Fazbear Entertainment tragedies, might work to expose the company's crimes to the public, might seek some kind of systemic change. Henry does none of these things. He builds a trap, kills his enemies, frees his daughter, and dies. The franchise continues after him, new games revealing new horrors, because he was never trying to end the franchise. He was trying to end his own story, and in that he succeeded. The thematic implications of Henry's choice extend to questions about what we can reasonably expect from victims of trauma. Henry lost his daughter to murder. That loss consumed the rest of his life, driving him to decades of investigation, planning, and ultimately self-sacrifice. Is this response admirable, a testament to the depth of his love and the strength of his determination, or is it tragic, a waste of whatever life remained to him? Years spent in obsession rather than healing. The game presents both readings as valid, never explicitly endorsing one interpretation over the other. Fans have created countless pieces of art, fiction, and analysis, exploring Henry's character and his relationship with Charlotte, William, and the broader Five Nights at Freddy's mythology. He has become a popular subject for fan works precisely because of his emotional depth, his moral complexity, and the gaps in his story that invite speculation. What was he doing during those years of hiding? How did he feel when he learned the full truth about William? What went through his mind as he designed Lefty, knowing he was building a trap for his own daughter? These questions have inspired thousands of creative interpretations. The design philosophy behind Henry as a character reflects Scott Cawthon's broader approach to Five Nights at Freddy's storytelling. Rather than explaining everything explicitly, the games present fragments, mysteries, and ambiguities that invite community engagement. Henry is never shown on screen in the main games, only heard through his cassette recordings. His backstory is revealed piecemeal, through minigames, endings, and implications. This approach creates a character who feels real precisely because he is not fully explained, whose humanity emerges from the spaces between what we are told. The voice performance of Henry in Pizzeria Simulator deserves special recognition for bringing this minimally defined character to life. Every word of his final speech is delivered with careful attention to emotional weight. From the controlled professionalism of his address to Elizabeth, to the breaking tenderness of his words to Charlotte, the performance sells the idea that this is a man who has been waiting decades for this moment, who has rehearsed these words countless times in his mind, who finally has the opportunity to say what he has always. As we approach the conclusion of this exploration of Henry Emily, let us return to the themes that define his story: creation and consequence, trust and betrayal, grief and determination, love that persists beyond death, redemption that comes at the ultimate cost. These themes are woven throughout the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise, but they find their fullest expression in the character of Henry Emily, the man who built an empire of childhood entertainment and then burned it to the ground to save the soul of his murdered daughter. Henry's final speech remains one of the most quoted and referenced moments in all of Five Nights at Freddy's lore. Fans have memorized it, analyzed it, created memes and fan art based on it. The speech has become iconic not just because of its narrative significance, but because of its emotional resonance. In a franchise often associated with jump scares and creepy animatronics, Henry's words remind us that the real horror is human. The murder of innocent children, the betrayal of trust, the weight of guilt and grief that survivors must carry. The line about the darkest pit of hell opening to swallow William has become particularly memorable, a condemnation that carries the weight of religious conviction. Henry speaks of heaven and hell as real places, of peace waiting beyond the smoke, of a devil who should not be kept waiting. This religious dimension adds another layer to his character, suggesting a man of faith whose beliefs have been tested but not broken by the horrors he has witnessed. He sends William to hell with the certainty of someone who believes such a place exists and that William's crimes have earned him a place there. The contrast between Henry's words to William and his words to Charlotte could not be sharper. To William, condemnation, fury, eternal damnation. To Charlotte, apology, tenderness, love that has endured through decades of separation. These parallel addresses reveal Henry's emotional range, his capacity for both righteous anger and gentle affection. He is not a man reduced to a single emotion by his trauma. He can hate and love with equal intensity, and both emotions feel genuine. The final image of Henry's speech, as the temperature climbs and the flames consume everything, is one of release. After decades of guilt, grief, and determination, Henry can finally rest. He has done what he set out to do. He has freed Charlotte. He has condemned William. He has ended the nightmare, or at least his part in it. Whatever comes next, whatever new horrors emerge from the ashes of Fazbear Entertainment, will not be his concern. He has earned his peace. And so we come to the end of Henry Emily's story, a story that spans decades and multiple media, that encompasses tragedy and triumph, that speaks to fundamental questions about love, loss, and responsibility. He was a creator whose creations were corrupted. He was a father who could not save his daughter. He was a friend who was betrayed by his closest companion. And in the end, he was a man who gave everything he had to make things right, accepting his own death as the price of that redemption. The legacy Henry leaves behind is complicated. Fazbear Entertainment continues to exist in the games that follow Pizzeria Simulator, suggesting that his destruction of the company was either incomplete or temporary. William Afton continues to return in various forms, suggesting that even hell cannot hold him permanently. But Charlotte, at least, appears to have found peace. The tears on the puppet's mask are gone. The spirit of Henry's daughter, the soul he spent decades trying to save, is free. Perhaps that is enough. Perhaps saving one soul, freeing one innocent victim, justifies everything Henry sacrificed. Perhaps the measure of a life is not the scope of its impact, but the depth of its love. And by that measure, Henry Emily lived a life of profound meaning despite its tragedy. As you go about your day, as you return to the ordinary concerns that fill our lives, Remember the story of Henry Emily. Remember that the things we create have consequences we cannot predict. Remember that the people we trust may not be worthy of that trust. Remember that grief can consume us or drive us, and that the choice between those fates is never as clear as we might wish. And remember that love, even love that cannot save its object, even love that ends in fire and ash, has a value that transcends all the darkness of the world. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the lore of Five Nights at Freddy's. If you found this exploration valuable, if Henry's story resonated with you the way it has resonated with so many fans of the franchise, I encourage you to like this video and subscribe to Archive Between Worlds for more deep dives into the stories that fascinate us. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts on Henry Emily, your theories about the aspects of his story that remain mysterious, your own interpretations of what his sacrifice meant and what legacy he left behind. The night is long, and there are many more stories to tell. Until next time, dear listeners, may your music boxes stay wound, and may your souls find the peace that Henry finally achieved. To fully appreciate the weight of Henry Emily's story, let us trace his journey through time, examining each major event in the chronological order that shaped his life, his grief, and his ultimate sacrifice. This timeline reveals not just what happened, but when, placing Henry's personal tragedy within the broader context of Fazbear Entertainment's dark history. The early 1970s marked the beginning of everything. In what most sources place around 1973, Henry Emily and William Afton come together to establish Fredbear's Family Diner. These are the years of hope and ambition, when two young entrepreneurs see an opportunity in the family entertainment industry and decide to pursue it together. Henry, with his engineering genius and creative vision, designs and builds the first animatronics. William, with his business acumen and presumably charismatic personality, handles the operational and financial aspects of their venture. During this foundational period, Henry develops the spring-lock technology that would define Fazbear Entertainment's early animatronics. The innovation is remarkable. Suits that can function autonomously as robotic entertainers or be worn by human performers, switching between modes with the use of a hand crank. Fredbear and Spring Bonnie, the two original mascots, represent the fruits of this innovation. They become beloved figures at Fredbear's Family Diner, entertaining countless children and establishing the formula that Fazbear Entertainment would follow for years to come. The late 1970s bring expansion and success. Fazbear Entertainment grows from a single diner into a corporate entity with ambitions beyond Hurricane, Utah. Henry and William work with contractors and partners to scale their operations. Evidence from the tales from the Pizzaplex series and The Secret of the Mimic Game suggests that Edwin Murray and his company, Murray's Costume Manor, played a significant role during this period, manufacturing animatronic components and potentially designing some of the characters that would later become Fazbear staples. It is during this period that Henry's personal life flourishes alongside his professional success. He marries, though the details of his wife and their relationship remain largely unexplored in canon. Most importantly, he becomes a father. Charlotte Emily is born, the daughter who will become the center of Henry's world and whose death will define the rest of his existence. We do not know the exact year of Charlotte's birth, but based on her apparent age in the security puppet minigame, she was likely born in the late 1970s, making her approximately 3 to 5 years old at the time of her death. The early 1980s represent the peak of Henry's professional achievements and the beginning of his personal nightmare. Freddy Fazbear's Pizza opens in 1983, a larger and more elaborate venue than the original Fredbear's Family Diner. Henry designs new animatronics for this location. Freddy Fazbear, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy, These characters build on the success of Fredbear and Spring Bonnie while offering more variety and entertainment value. The franchise seems poised for continued growth and success. Behind the scenes, however, something is changing. William Afton, for reasons that remain one of the great mysteries of the franchise, begins to show signs of the darkness that will consume him. Whether this darkness was always present and simply hidden, whether it emerged as a result of some trauma or circumstance, or whether it grew gradually over time, the result is a man capable of murdering children without apparent remorse. The year 1983 brings two catastrophic events. First, the bite of '83, in which William's youngest son has his skull crushed by Fredbear's mechanical jaws during a cruel prank orchestrated by his older brother Michael. This incident leads to the child's death and the eventual closure of Fredbear's family diner. The connection between this tragedy and William's subsequent behavior has been the subject of much fan speculation, with some suggesting that the death of his son triggered William's murderous impulses. The second catastrophe strikes Henry directly. Charlotte Emily, his beloved daughter, is murdered outside one of the Fazbear Entertainment restaurants. The exact timing of this event relative to the bite of '83 is somewhat ambiguous, but both occurred in 1983, making it a year of unimaginable loss for both founding families. Charlotte's death, as we have discussed extensively, leads to her possession of the security puppet and the beginning of the supernatural horrors that would plague Fazbear Entertainment for decades. The immediate aftermath of Charlotte's murder sees Henry retreating from active involvement in the company he helped build. Phone Guy, in his Five Nights at Freddy's 2 recordings, mentions that the original owner has been missing for years, that Fazbear Entertainment has been trying to track him down. This suggests that Henry distanced himself from the business, unable or unwilling to continue participating in an enterprise so deeply connected to his daughter's death. The year 1985 brings the missing children incident, William Afton's most notorious crime. 5 children, Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz, and Cassidy, are lured into a back room at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza and murdered. William hides their bodies in the animatronic suits, and the spirits of these children, guided by Charlotte's puppet, possess Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, and the mysterious Golden Freddy. This incident cements William's reputation as a serial killer, though he evades conviction due to insufficient evidence. For Henry, the missing children incident must have been confirmation of his worst fears. His former friend has not stopped killing. The murder of Charlotte was not an isolated incident, but the beginning of a pattern. 5 more families have now experienced the loss that consumed Henry, and those 5 children are now trapped in the animatronics that Henry helped create. The guilt he expresses in his later recordings, the sense that he let the wound bleed out to cause all of them, likely crystallized during this period. The late 1980s see continued attempts by Fazbear Entertainment to revive the franchise. The new Freddy Fazbear's Pizza opens in 1987, featuring the toy animatronics alongside the refurbished classic models. This location is plagued by mysterious incidents, including another possible appearance by William Afton in a yellow suit and the bite of '87, in which an animatronic attacks a person and removes part of their frontal lobe. The restaurant closes quickly, and the toy animatronics are scrapped. Through all of this, Henry remains absent from the narrative. He is not mentioned in the events of Five Nights at Freddy's 2, not present during the disasters at the 1987 location, apparently uninvolved in Fazbear Entertainment's continued attempts to operate. But his absence does not mean inactivity, based on the knowledge he demonstrates in Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria simulator. Henry spent these years investigating, learning, and planning. He discovered the existence of Remnant. He obtained blueprints for William's scooper. He pieced together the full scope of his former friend's crimes. The 1990s bring the events of the original Five Nights at Freddy's game. The smaller Freddy Fazbear's Pizza operates using the original animatronics, still possessed by the spirits of the missing children. Mike Schmidt, who may or may not be Michael Afton under an alias, works as a night guard and survives a week of attempted animatronic attacks. The restaurant eventually closes, supposedly due to health code violations and financial difficulties, though the constant deaths of security personnel certainly contributed. It is after the closure of this location that William Afton returns to dismantle the animatronics. The Follow Me minigames from Five Nights at Freddy's 3 depict this event, showing a purple figure destroying the animatronics one by one. The spirits are freed from their mechanical prisons, but they are not finished with William. They corner him in the safe room, trap him, and watch as he climbs into the Spring Bonnie suit and suffers a fatal spring lock failure. William becomes Springtrap, a walking corpse trapped in a decaying animatronic rabbit suit. The location is sealed with Springtrap inside. 30 years pass. During this period, Henry continues his preparations, waiting for the right moment. The spirits of the murdered children linger, unable to move on while their killer still exists. Charlotte, in the puppet, continues her vigil, and William, in Springtrap, presumably remains in whatever state of existence a soul fused with a spring-locked corpse experiences. The year 2023, or thereabouts based on timeline calculations, brings Fazbear's Fright, the horror attraction. This venture, depicted in Five Nights at Freddy's 3, transforms the abandoned restaurant into a haunted house attraction, capitalizing on the urban legends that have grown around the Fazbear name. Springtrap is discovered and brought to the attraction, becoming its main feature. A night guard works to survive while the restless spirit of William Afton hunts them. The attraction ultimately burns down, though Springtrap is seen escaping in one of the endings. The timeline between Fazbear's Fright and Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator is uncertain, but likely spans several years. During this period, William, now calling himself Scraptrap due to his deteriorated condition, continues to exist somewhere in the world. The Funtime animatronics, which had merged into Ennard, separate, with Circus Baby being ejected and becoming Scrap Baby. The remaining Funtime components become Molten Freddy. These scattered entities are the pieces that Henry will eventually gather together. Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator takes place sometime around 2027, based on calculations involving the 30 years mentioned in various game sources. This is the culmination of Henry's decades-long plan. He opens a fake pizzeria, attracts the possessed animatronics, and burns everything to the ground. The timeline ends, at least for Henry, in fire and finality. But the Five Nights at Freddy's timeline does not end with Henry's death. Five Nights at Freddy's, Help Wanted, released in 2019, reveals that William has survived in digital form as Glitchtrap. Five Nights at Freddy's, Security Breach, released in 2021, shows William rebuilt as Burntrap beneath the Freddy Fazbear Mega Pizzaplex. The Ruin DLC continues this storyline, and Secret of the Mimic, released in 2025, expands the early history of Fazbear Entertainment, revealing new details about the company's origins and the role of characters like Edwin Murray. Henry's absence from these later games is notable but appropriate. His story ended in the Pizzeria Simulator fire. He achieved what he set out to achieve, freeing Charlotte, destroying William's physical form, and liberating the trapped souls. That William found ways to return, that new horrors emerged from the ashes of the old, does not diminish Henry's sacrifice. He did what he could. He saved who he could save, and he found at last the rest that had eluded him for decades. While much of our discussion has focused on Henry Emily's emotional journey and moral character, it would be incomplete without examining his technical achievements. Henry was, first and foremost, an engineer of extraordinary capability. His inventions shaped the Fazbear Entertainment franchise, and by extension, the entire narrative of Five Nights at Freddy's. Understanding what he built, how it functioned, and what it became illuminates aspects of his character that might otherwise remain in shadow. The spring lock system remains Henry's most significant innovation, revolutionizing the concept of animatronic entertainment. Before spring lock technology, animatronics and costumes were entirely separate things. You could have a robot that moved and performed on its own, or you could have a suit that a person wore to play a character, but you could not have both in the same device. Henry's spring locks changed that equation entirely. The technical principle behind spring lock suits is relatively straightforward, even if the engineering required to implement it was complex. The animatronic components of the suit, the mechanical parts that allow it to move autonomously, are mounted on spring-loaded mechanisms. By inserting a hand crank into designated slots and turning firmly, these springs compress, pulling the animatronic components tight against the inner walls of the suit. This creates enough space in the suit's torso, arms, and legs for a human performer to fit inside. The springs then lock in place, holding the animatronic components back and allowing the suit to be worn safely. The danger, of course, comes from spring lock failure. The mechanisms holding the animatronic parts back are under constant tension. Any disruption to that tension, whether from moisture, physical impact, or simple mechanical failure over time, can cause the locks to release. When they do, the animatronic components snap back to their original positions with tremendous force. For anyone wearing the suit, this means being impaled and crushed by metal parts designed to operate autonomously, not to accommodate a human body. Phone Guy's warnings about spring lock suits in Five Nights at Freddy's 3 reveal that these failures were not theoretical concerns, but documented events. Employees were instructed to avoid moisture, to avoid sudden movements, to basically avoid anything that might trigger the locks. And if a spring lock failure did occur, the official protocol was not to seek medical attention, but to find a secluded area to bleed out without disturbing guests. This grim instruction speaks volumes about Fazbear Entertainment's priorities, and about the known lethality of Henry's invention. Did Henry anticipate these dangers? Based on his engineering expertise, he almost certainly understood the risks inherent in spring lock technology. Springs under tension are inherently unstable systems, prone to failure under various conditions. Any engineer with Henry's apparent level of skill would have recognized this. Why then did he proceed with the design? Several possibilities present themselves. Perhaps Henry believed the risks could be adequately managed through proper training and protocols. If employees followed the correct procedures, maintained the suits properly, and avoided the specific conditions that triggered failures, the spring locks could be used safely. This interpretation casts Henry as an optimist who underestimated the gap between theoretical safety and practical reality. Alternatively, perhaps Henry was under pressure from William or from market demands to produce the innovative technology that would set Fazbear Entertainment apart from competitors. The spring lock suits were a genuine selling point, allowing for entertainment experiences that no other venue could offer. The commercial value of this innovation may have outweighed the safety concerns in the minds of those making decisions. Or perhaps Henry, in the enthusiasm of his creative work, simply did not fully consider the implications of what he was building. Engineers throughout history have created devices without fully anticipating how they would be used or misused. Henry may have seen spring locks as a technical puzzle to be solved, only later realizing the human cost of his solution. Whatever his reasoning, the spring lock technology ultimately proved far more dangerous than any legitimate entertainment application would justify. The suits were used to commit murder, with William Afton donning spring bonnet to approach and kill children. They caused deaths through springlock failures, as employees and potentially others fell victim to the mechanisms. And in the end, they became William's prison, trapping him in the very technology that Henry had created. Beyond the springlock suits, Henry's other creations demonstrate a range of engineering capabilities. The classic animatronics, Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy, represent a different design philosophy from the springlocks. These are dedicated autonomous systems, robots designed to perform on stages and interact with guests without human operators inside. Their programming allows for free roaming at night, the behavior that makes them such effective antagonists in the games. The security puppet represents another engineering direction entirely, a machine designed for a specific protective function rather than general entertainment. Its ability to track Charlotte via her green bracelet suggests sophisticated sensing and targeting systems. Its seemingly autonomous decision to pursue its protective programming, even when physically obstructed, as seen when it breaks free from the box to find Charlotte, implies a robustness of design that prioritized function over easy deactivation. Lefty, the animatronic Henry built specifically to capture the puppet, demonstrates that his engineering capabilities remained sharp even decades after his original creations. Lefty is a complex machine with multiple integrated systems. The lure mechanism to attract the puppet, the encapsulation system to trap it, the fusion process to integrate the captured entity into Lefty's own structure, and the transport functionality to bring it to Henry's trap. The acronym LEFTE encodes these functions, revealing Henry's methodical approach to the technical challenge of capturing his own daughter's possessed form. The trap beneath Freddy Fazbear's pizza place, the labyrinth that Henry describes in his final speech, represents perhaps his most elaborate engineering achievement. This is not a simple room or building but a maze, specifically designed to confuse and contain powerful supernatural entities. The sounds of children that draw the animatronics deeper into the passages, the absence of exits, the ventilation system designed to spread fire rapidly when activated. All of these elements demonstrate sophisticated planning and construction. Henry's understanding of remnant, the supernatural substance that binds souls to animatronics, adds another dimension to his technical knowledge. While remnant is not technology in the conventional sense, Henry clearly studied it enough to understand its properties and vulnerabilities. His knowledge that high temperatures could neutralize remnant, freeing the trapped souls, informed his choice of fire as the mechanism for the final cleansing. Without this understanding, the burning of the pizzeria would simply have destroyed the animatronics without liberating the spirits within. The contrast between Henry's creations and William's adds important context to both characters. William's fun-time animatronics, designed at Circus Baby's Entertainment and Rentals, were built with murder as their explicit purpose. Circus Baby's design includes a claw mechanism that can emerge from her torso to grab and kill children. The fun-time animatronics can physically capture people within their bodies, with storage tanks designed to hold victims. The scooper, while technically a device rather than an animatronic, was created to extract remnant from possessed machines. Henry's creations, by contrast, were designed for entertainment, and in the case of the security puppet, for protection. They became instruments of horror, not because Henry designed them that way, but because William corrupted their purpose, and because the supernatural phenomena of possession transformed them into something their creator never intended. This distinction is crucial for understanding Henry's moral position. He built tools that were misused, not weapons that were used as designed. The engineering achievements also reveal something about Henry's intellectual capacity and creative imagination. building functioning animatronics in the 1970s, before computer-aided design, before modern manufacturing techniques, before many of the tools that contemporary roboticists take for granted, required exceptional skill and vision. Henry was not just a competent engineer, but a pioneer, pushing the boundaries of what animatronic technology could achieve. This brilliance makes his failure to stop William all the more poignant. Henry had the intelligence to build revolutionary machines, to design complex traps, to understand supernatural phenomena well enough to devise countermeasures. Why could he not have used? Why did decades pass between Charlotte's murder and the final confrontation? The answer seems to lie not in Henry's technical abilities, but in his emotional state. Grief paralyzed him. Guilt immobilized him. The same mind that could design Lefty and plan the labyrinth was unable for years to take the actions that his circumstances demanded. This disconnect between capability and action is deeply human. Many people possess skills and knowledge that they fail to apply to their most pressing problems. Held back by emotional barriers, psychological blind spots, or simple exhaustion, Henry's delay in confronting William, while frustrating from a narrative standpoint, reflects the reality that intelligence alone does not guarantee effective response to trauma. The brilliant engineer and the grieving father were the same person, and sometimes the father's pain prevented the engineer from acting. The speech that Henry delivers during the completion ending of Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria simulator deserves dedicated analysis, not just for what it says, but for how it says it. This monologue, delivered as the temperature rises and flames consume the building, represents Henry's final statement, his summary of everything he has learned, suffered, and ultimately achieved. Every word carries weight, every phrase reveals character, and the speech as a whole stands as one of the most emotionally resonant moments in gaming history. Connection terminated. These are Henry's first words, a technical phrase that immediately establishes his identity as an engineer, someone who thinks in terms of systems and processes even while addressing matters of life, death, and the supernatural. The phrase also carries symbolic weight. Henry is terminating the connection between the trapped souls and their animatronic prisons. He is terminating the connection between William Afton and the world of the living. He is terminating the connection between himself and his decades of grief. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Elizabeth, if you still even remember that name. Henry's address to Elizabeth Afton, William's daughter, trapped in Scrap Baby, reveals layers of complexity. The apology is formal, almost ironic, given that he is not actually sorry to interrupt her gloating about the children she believes are within reach. The question about whether she remembers her name suggests that Elizabeth has been corrupted so thoroughly by her father's legacy that her original identity may have been lost. She was a child once, innocent as the children William murdered. What she has become is something else, but I'm afraid you've been misinformed. You are not here to receive a gift, nor have you been called here by the individual you assume. This passage reveals the misdirection that Henry has employed. The animatronics believed they were being gathered by someone, perhaps William, perhaps Fazbear Entertainment, for some purpose that would benefit them. They believed children awaited them, victims to claim. Henry shatters this illusion with his revelation that they have been lured into a trap, although you have indeed been called. You have all been called here into a labyrinth of sounds and smells, misdirection and misfortune. The poetic quality of Henry's language emerges here. Labyrinth of sounds and smells evokes the sensory experience of the animatronics, machines designed to respond to audio and perhaps other inputs, following phantom signals through endless passages. Misdirection and misfortune acknowledges both Henry's deception and the tragedy that brought everyone to this point. A labyrinth with no exit, a maze with no prize. You don't even realize that you are trapped. The repetition of labyrinth and maze imagery emphasizes the hopelessness of the animatronics situation. They have been hunting through the passages beneath the pizzeria, following the sounds of children, never finding their prey, never realizing that there are no children to find. Henry has used their predatory programming against them, exploiting their desire to kill as the very mechanism of their containment. Your lust for blood has driven you in endless circles, chasing the cries of children in some unseen chamber, always seeming so near, yet somehow out of reach. This is perhaps the most damning passage in the speech. Henry acknowledges the animatronic's murderous nature without qualification or excuse. Whatever sympathy might exist for the trapped souls within these machines, they have become killers, driven by lust for blood. Their inability to find children to kill is presented not as tragedy, but as justice, the fitting end for those who would harm the innocent. But you will never find them. None of you will. This is where your story ends. The finality of these statements marks a shift in the speech's tone. Henry is no longer explaining or describing. He is pronouncing judgment. The story of the possessed animatronics, which has spanned decades and multiple games, reaches its conclusion not with victory or escape, but with obliteration. And to you, my brave volunteer, who somehow found this job listing not intended for you. Henry's address to the player character introduces a moment of uncertainty into the speech. Who was the intended recipient of the job listing? Why did someone else end up in this position instead? The description of the player as brave and as a volunteer suggests respect and perhaps gratitude, but also acknowledgement that the player has been pulled into something dangerous without full understanding. Although there was a way out planned for you, I have a feeling that's not what you want. I have a feeling that you are right where you want to be. Henry recognizes that the player character, likely Michael Afton, has chosen to remain. This is not a kidnapping or a trap, at least not for Michael. It is a willing participation in the final cleansing. Michael, who has spent years trying to undo his father's evil, has found the end he was seeking. Death alongside the other players in this tragedy, an end to his own tortured existence as a reanimated corpse. I am remaining as well. I am nearby. Henry confirms his own presence and his intention to die in the fire. He could have orchestrated this trap from a safe distance, burning the animatronics while he watched from afar. Instead, he has chosen to be present, to share the fate of those he has condemned. This choice reflects his sense of responsibility, but also, perhaps, his exhaustion. He has been waiting for this moment for so long. He is ready for it to end. This place will not be remembered, and the memory of everything that started this can finally begin to fade away. Henry envisions a future where Fazbear Entertainment is forgotten, where the tragedies that plagued it fade from collective memory. This is perhaps overly optimistic, given that the franchise continues in universe after Pizzeria Simulator, but it represents Henry's hope. He wants the nightmare to end, not just for himself, but for the world, as the agony of every tragedy should. This brief phrase is packed with meaning. Henry acknowledges that the events of Five Nights at Freddy's constitute agony and tragedy, not entertainment or spectacle. The deaths of children, the corruption of creations, the destruction of families, these are genuine horrors that should be mourned and then, eventually, released. The desire for the memory to fade is not disrespect for the victims, but recognition that endless dwelling on tragedy serves no one. And to you monsters trapped in the corridors, be still and give up your spirits. Henry now addresses the animatronics directly, calling them monsters without hesitation. The command to be still echoes the language of death itself, the quieting of movement that marks the end of life. Give up your spirits is both a command and a release, an instruction to let go of the rage and pain that has kept them tethered to their mechanical prisons. They don't belong to you. This statement clarifies Henry's view of the possession phenomenon. The spirits inhabiting the animatronics do not belong in those machines. They were placed there either by William's acts of murder or by Charlotte's attempts to give them new life, but the animatronics are not their rightful vessels. The spirits deserve rest, not endless existence in metal and plastic. For most of you, I believe there is peace and perhaps more waiting for you after the smoke clears. Henry expresses belief in an afterlife, a place of peace that awaits the murdered children after their second deaths in the fire. The qualifier for most of you is significant, suggesting that some will not find peace. This prepares us for his next statement. Although for one of you, the darkest pit of hell has opened to swallow you whole. So don't keep the devil waiting, old friend. Henry's condemnation of William Afton is absolute and unflinching. While the murdered children will find peace, William will find damnation. The reference to hell, to the devil, places this judgment in explicitly religious terms. Henry believes in eternal punishment, and he believes William has earned it. Old friend is bitter and ironic, a reminder of what their relationship once was and what William destroyed. The speech then shifts to its most personal passage. "And to you, my daughter, if you can hear me." Henry's voice, which has been controlled and measured throughout, begins to show cracks. He is no longer addressing enemies or strangers, but his own child, the daughter he lost decades ago. The spirit trapped in the puppet that he has deliberately captured and brought to this final moment. "I knew you would return as well. It's in your nature to protect the innocent." Henry acknowledges Charlotte's fundamental character, her drive to protect others that persisted even after her death. The puppet, for all its frightening appearances in the games, was never truly malevolent. Charlotte used her second existence to guide other murdered children, to give them what she found in possession. Henry recognizes this goodness even as he prepares to end it. "I'm sorry on that day, the day you were shut out and left to die. No one was there to lift you up into their arms the way you lifted others into yours." This is Henry's apology, the one he has waited decades to deliver. Charlotte died alone, outside the restaurant in the rain. No one came to help her. The security puppet failed. Henry was not there. This failure has haunted him for his entire adult life, and now at last he can express his sorrow directly to the daughter he could not save. "And then, what became of you?" The pause after this fragment, implied by the sentence structure, speaks volumes. Henry cannot bring himself to fully describe what Charlotte endured. The decades of existence as the puppet, the murders she may have witnessed, the endless watching over other trapped souls. What became of you encompasses all of that horror without detailing it. "I should have known you wouldn't be content to disappear. Not my daughter." Henry recognizes Charlotte's persistence as a reflection of her character, not just a supernatural phenomenon. She would not simply fade away when there was work to be done, children to protect, justice to seek. This persistence, admirable as it might be, also meant decades of suffering that Henry's intervention will finally end. "I couldn't save you then, so let me save you now. It's time to rest, for you, and for those you have carried in your arms." The salvation Henry offers is death, release, the end of existence as a possessed animatronic. The reference to those Charlotte has carried in your arms recalls the image of the security puppet cradling her body in the rain, and extends it to all the children Charlotte has guided over the years. Henry is saving not just his daughter, but all the souls she has been shepherding. This ends for all of us. Henry includes himself in the ending. He will not survive to enjoy a world free of Fazbear Entertainment's horrors. He will die in the fire with everyone else, sharing the fate of victims and victimizers alike. This is not martyrdom in the traditional sense, not sacrifice for the sake of others who will benefit. It is simply conclusion, the termination of stories that have all gone on too long, end communication. Henry's final words echo his opening, bringing the speech full circle. Technical language bookends the deeply emotional content, reminding us that this is a man who thinks like an engineer, even while feeling like a father. The communication ends, the fire rises, and the nightmare, at last, concludes. Henry Emily's impact extends far beyond the games themselves into the broader culture of Five Nights at Freddy's fandom. His character has inspired countless works of fan art, fan fiction, video essays, and community discussions. Understanding how the community has received and interpreted, Henry reveals aspects of his character that resonate with audiences on a deep level. The speech from the completion ending has become iconic within the community, frequently quoted, remixed, and referenced in fan content. Fans have created animated versions of the speech, voice-acted performances with different interpretations, musical remixes that set Henry's words to dramatic scores, and parody versions that place the speech in humorous contexts. This variety of fan responses demonstrates both the speech's emotional power and its flexibility as a cultural artifact. Fan artists have created numerous visual interpretations of Henry, ranging from realistic portraits to stylized cartoon depictions. The visual design established by Lady Fizzy, with the dirty blonde hair, chin-strap beard, glasses, and flannel shirt, provides a foundation that artists build upon in various ways. Some depictions emphasize Henry's grief, showing him in moments of despair or loss. Others highlight his determination, portraying him as a man on a mission. Still others explore his relationship with Charlotte, creating scenes of father and daughter that the games themselves never show. Fan fiction exploring Henry's character often focuses on the gaps in his canonical story. What were his early years like before Charlotte's death? How did his marriage function? And what happened to Mrs. Emily? What was his relationship with Charlotte like when she was alive? What did he do during the decades between her death and the events of Pizzeria Simulator? These questions have inspired extensive creative exploration, with fan authors filling in the blanks with their own interpretations. The emotional resonance of Henry's story particularly appeals to fans who have experienced loss or grief themselves. Many testimonials within the community describe how Henry's character helped them process their own experiences, how his determination to make things right despite devastating loss provided a model for perseverance. The universality of parental love, the devastating impact of losing a child, and the possibility of finding purpose even in grief all contribute to Henry's appeal for these fans. Theory crafting around Henry's character has generated extensive discussion within the community. Fans debate questions like whether Henry is the protagonist of Five Nights at Freddy's 3, whether he has any connection to the mysterious characters Desk Man or Old Man Consequences from FNAF World, and what exactly he was doing during his years of absence from Fazbear Entertainment. These discussions demonstrate engagement with the character beyond simple appreciation, a desire to understand every aspect of his story. The relationship between Henry and William has inspired particular fan interest, with many works exploring the dynamics of their partnership before it soured. Fan fiction often depicts them as genuine friends, sometimes even implying deeper feelings that make William's betrayal all the more devastating. These interpretations, while not canonical, speak to the community's desire to understand how such close partners could become such bitter enemies. Henry's portrayal in fan works often emphasizes his moral complexity more than the games themselves do. While the games present him as fundamentally sympathetic, with his darker aspects implied rather than explicit, fan works sometimes explore the possibility that Henry knew more about William's crimes than he admitted, or that his inaction contributed more significantly to the body count than his final sacrifice can atone for. These darker interpretations add depth to the character by forcing engagement with uncomfortable questions. The community's response to Henry's appearance in the Five Nights at Freddy's 2 film has been particularly enthusiastic. Skeet Ulrich's portrayal introduced Henry to audiences who may not have engaged deeply with the game lore, and fan discussions have compared and contrasted the film version with the game version extensively. The visual depiction of Henry's grief, his physical presence in scenes rather than just his voice on recordings, and his interaction with Mike Schmidt all provided new material for fan engagement. Cosplay of Henry has become increasingly common at conventions and fan gatherings, with fans recreating his established visual appearance or developing their own interpretations based on the character's personality and story. The relatively simple costume requirements, consisting primarily of flannel, overalls, glasses, and appropriate hairstyling, make Henry accessible for cosplayers while still allowing for creative variation. Musical tributes to Henry have emerged from the fan community, with artists creating original songs that tell his story, explore his emotions, or reference his final speech. These songs range from acoustic ballads reflecting on his loss to more intense rock compositions capturing his determination and rage. The musicality of Henry's speech itself, with its rhythmic phrases and emotional cadences, makes it natural material for musical adaptation. The community has also engaged with questions about Henry's legacy within the Five Nights at Freddy's universe. What do the events after Pizzeria Simulator mean for Henry's sacrifice? Did his plan succeed, or was it ultimately futile given William's continued returns? These discussions often reveal different philosophical perspectives within the fandom, with some arguing that Henry's sacrifice was meaningful, regardless of subsequent events, and others questioning whether true success is possible against an enemy who cannot be permanently destroyed. As we reach the conclusion of our exploration of Henry Emily's story, let us gather the threads we have woven and consider what they reveal about this complex, tragic, and ultimately redemptive character. Henry Emily represents something rare in horror fiction, a creator who takes responsibility for his creations. So many horror narratives feature scientists, engineers, or inventors who build something terrible and then flee, leaving others to deal with the consequences. Henry could have done the same. He could have remained in hiding, allowed Fazbear Entertainment to collapse under the weight of its own horrors, and lived out his days in obscurity. Instead, he spent decades preparing to confront the evil he had inadvertently enabled, and he gave his life. This sense of responsibility extends to his relationship with Charlotte. Henry could not save his daughter from William Afton. That failure haunted him for the rest of his life. But he never stopped trying to make things right. He built Lefty to capture the puppet. He constructed the labyrinth to trap the animatronics. He designed the fire to destroy Remnant and free the trapped souls. Every action he took after Charlotte's death was oriented toward the goal of finally, at last, giving her peace. The contrast with William Afton could not be sharper. William kills his own daughter through his creation of Circus Baby. He shows no remorse. He continues killing. He clings to existence through any means necessary, returning again and again despite being killed multiple times. Where Henry sacrifices himself for his daughter, William sacrifices his daughter for himself. Where Henry seeks to end suffering, William seeks only to perpetuate his own existence. This contrast illuminates the moral framework of Five Nights at Freddy's. The franchise is not nihilistic despite its dark subject matter. It believes in good and evil, in love and hate, in sacrifice and selfishness. Henry represents the possibility of redemption even in the darkest circumstances. William represents the horror of evil that refuses to acknowledge itself, that sees only advantage and never consequence. The tragedy of Henry's story lies not in his death but in his life. He lived for decades carrying the weight of Charlotte's murder, the guilt of his perceived failures, the knowledge of William's crimes. The fire at Pizzeria Simulator was not a sacrifice in the sense of giving up something valuable. It was a release, an end to suffering that had become unbearable. Henry's death was, in a sense, a mercy he granted himself, after ensuring that his obligations were fulfilled. And yet, for all the darkness, there is hope in Henry's story. The souls he freed, including Charlotte, find peace. The children murdered by William are no longer trapped in animatronic prisons. The nightmare that began with the opening of Fredbear's family diner reaches some form of conclusion. These are small victories, perhaps, in a world where William Afton can still return in digital form, where Fazbear Entertainment continues to operate, where new horrors surely await. But they are victories nonetheless. For fans of Five Nights at Freddy's, Henry Emily serves as a reminder that the franchise is about more than jump scares and creepy animatronics. At its core, this is a story about families torn apart by violence, about innocence lost and corruption spread, about the long struggle to achieve justice in a world that seems indifferent to suffering. Henry embodies all of these themes in his journey from hopeful entrepreneur to grieving father, to determined avenger to sacrificial lamb. The story of Henry Emily is, ultimately, a story about love. Love for Charlotte that drove him to create the security puppet. Love that was violated when William murdered his daughter. Love that persisted through decades of grief and guilt. Love that found expression in the fire that freed Charlotte's soul. Everything Henry did, from his earliest inventions to his final words, was motivated by love for a daughter he could not save in life but refused to abandon in death. As you continue your journey through the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise, remember Henry Emily. Remember the man who built machines that brought joy to children, and then watched those machines become prisons for murdered souls. Remember the father who lost his daughter and spent the rest of his life trying to make things right. Remember the engineer who designed one final trap, one ultimate solution, one blazing end to a nightmare that had consumed him for decades. And remember, in the end, the flames that consumed Henry also freed him. After so many years of carrying guilt and grief, he found his release. After so many years of waiting and planning, he achieved his goal. After so many years of being unable to save Charlotte, he finally did. Connection terminated, but love endures. Thank you for spending this time with me, exploring the depths of Five Nights at Freddy's lore. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to Archive Between Worlds. Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts on Henry Emily, your favorite moments from his story, or your theories about the aspects we have not yet fully understood. The Five Nights at Freddy's universe is vast and full of mysteries, and together we can continue to explore its darkest corners and its most poignant moments. Until next time, dear listeners, may you find the peace that Henry sought, and may your stories end not in darkness but in light.